Well, following his arrest, we realised that here we had something very important, that this team were responsible for a whole series of sophisticated and very violent crimes. And the idea he could provide us a link. We asked him whether he would cooperate, and he said yes.
What's your reaction?
Supergrass systems.
Action, it sucks. Got a justice today, lads. What's that for?
9 men acquitted of murder after the testimony of 2 state witnesses, the Stewart brothers, was found to be infected with lies.
I think it would have been obvious to anyone examining the case in any kind of detail before the case was brought that this evidence wouldn't stack up in court, certainly to convict prisoners beyond reasonable doubt.
The failure of the modern-day Supergrass system could have serious implications for another case police are planning to bring involving a former Loyalist boss. Gary Haggerty is one of the highest-ranking Loyalists to turn Queen's evidence. He could implicate the entire top tier of the UVF, along with at least one police handler and their superiors.
If the Stewarts are at the bottom of that organisation, Haggerty was at the very top. And he could open doors into all sorts of places and all sorts of worlds that people don't want us to look into.
Supergrass and shopping your own son.
Yeah.
A lot of people would draw the line at family, wouldn't they?
Yeah, but see, you say blood is thicker than water, which it is, but the thing is, when you give your son that many opportunities to get away from the person that you knew that he was giving information on, and he wouldn't take the advice that he was giving him, what can you do?
Supergrass is a British slang term for an informant who turns king's evidence, often in return for protection and immunity from prosecution. A criminal turns state's evidence by admitting guilt and testifying as a witness for the state against their associate or accomplice, often in exchange for leniency in sentencing or immunity from prosecution. The testimony of a witness who testifies against a co-conspirator may be important in evidence. In the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth realms, the term QE or now KE is to turn Queen or King's evidence, depending on the sex of the reigning monarch. The term turning approver or turn King's approver was also historically used, especially in Ireland. An approver not only admitted his own guilt to a crime, but also incriminated his accomplices, both past and present, in exchange for avoiding the death sentence and obtaining a lesser penalty, such as life imprisonment or abjuration of the realm, or improving prison conditions. It has its origins in the 16th century and allows a person to become a crown witness and avoid pleading guilty. Even at this early stage, the court saw crown witness testimony as less reliable than other evidence, because it was encouraged in return for better treatment before the law. In 1751, regulations were introduced stipulating that the crown witness testimony should be corroborated with independent third-party evidence. Crown witnesses, known as supergrasses, were used during the Northern Ireland conflict. In the 1980s, about 30 members of paramilitary groups, both loyalist and republican, gave the authorities evidence against their former comrades in exchange for more lenient sentences or immunity from prosecution, as well as a new identity to protect them from retribution. Supergrass testimony was used, for example, in the trials against IRA members. In the British criminal underworld, police informants have been called grasses since the late 1930s, and the super prefix was coined by journalists in early 1970s to describe those who witnessed against fellow criminals in a series of high-profile mass trials at the time. The first known use of the word grass in that context is Arthur Gardner's crime novel Tinker's Kitchen, published in 1932, in which a grass is defined as an informer. The etymology of grass being used as signifying a traitor, a person who informs on people he or she intimately, ostensibly, can be traced to the expression snake in the grass, which has a similar meaning. The phrase derives from the writings of Virgil in Latin and has been known in the English language meaning traitor since the late 17th century. An alternative claim is made for the term originating from rhyming slang, whereby grasshopper is defined as a copper, meaning policeman. The rhyming slang version was supported in 1950 by lexicographer Paul Tempest, who wrote, "Grasser, one who gives information, a squealer or squeaker." The origin derives from rhyming slang. Grasshopper, copper, a grass or grasser tells the copper or policeman. In Northern Ireland, the term Supergrass especially refers to arrested paramilitaries who divulged in identities of their compatriots to the Royal Ulster Constabulary, possibly in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Sir John Herman, former Chief Constable of the Royal Ulster Constabulary, did not deny reports that inducements were paid, but denied figures as high as £50,000 were involved. The use of the term in Northern Ireland began with the arrest of Christopher Black in 1981. After securing assurances that he would have protection from prosecution, Mr. Black gave statements which led to 38 arrests. On the 5th of August 1983, 22 members of the Provisional IRA were sentenced to a total of more than 4,000 cumulative years in prison, based on Mr. Black's testimony alone. 18 of these convictions were overturned on appeal on the 17th of July 1986. By the end of 1982, 25 more Supergrasses had surfaced, contributing to arrests of over 600 people from paramilitary organisations, such as the Provisional IRA, the Irish National Liberation Army (INLA), and the Ulster Volunteer Force. On the 11th of April 1983, members of the loyalist Ulster Volunteer Force were jailed on the evidence of Supergrass Joseph Bennett. These convictions were all overturned on the 24th of December 1984. In October 1983, 7 people were convicted on the evidence provided by Supergrass Kevin McGrady, although the trial judge, Lord Chief Justice Robert Lowry, had described Mr. McGrady's evidence as bizarre, incredible, and contradictory. The last Supergrass trial finished on the 18th of December 1985, when 25 members of the INLA were jailed on the evidence of Harry Kirkpatrick. 24 of these convictions were later overturned on the 23rd of December 1986. Many convictions based on Supergrass testimony were later overturned, and the Supergrass system was discontinued in 1985 until reintroduction in 2011. The first Supergrass trial in 26 years began on the 8th of September 2011 for the murder of Ulster Defence Association member Tommy English. In Northern Ireland, the term tout is a popular alternative to grass. The police service of Northern Ireland have refused to use this term and prefer the term assisting offender, based on the legislation that enables the use of such evidence. The term Supergrass has also been used by the Royal Gazette, a daily newspaper in Bermuda, a British dependent territory. An article in the paper uses the term to describe a Transport Control Department worker convicted of selling driver's licenses to Portuguese applicants making the necessary English skills to pass the multiple choice exam. The worker was granted a conditional discharge in exchange for information on the Transport Control Department employees abusing the public trust. One of the most prolific Supergrasses in recent British history was Michael, whose evidence in 2001 led to 32 criminals being convicted, including his own mother, and the disruption of a £132 million drugs ring. Even in the most lurid annals of British crime, there has never been a player like Michael, a lifetime of evil, including drug smuggling, money laundering, and prostitution, brought him a fortune estimated at over £107 million. He ruled over the Underworld like a baron, respected and feted by the gangster elite. However, it was not Michael's success as a villain that assures his place in the UK criminal history. Rather, it is his staggering capacity for betrayal. On the 25th of April 1998, Customs investigators launched a knock codenamed Operation Draft. It uncovered 16 kilograms of cocaine, 2.9 tons of cannabis worth £11.6 million, guns, and £800,000 in cash. It also delivered up Michael and 15 members of his gang. What happened next shocked even customs men and their police colleagues. Michael, an arch criminal whose entire existence was founded on the Underworld Code, had decided to turn informer. So eager he was to name names, he is probably Britain's most prolific Supergrass. Not only did he inform on some of the most dangerous criminals operating today, he turned in his own mother, brother, wife, mistress, and the madam who ran his brothels. And it was to emerge he had been grassing up his criminal colleagues for years. At his trial, he accepted the suggestion that he was a polished liar and offered the jury this explanation: "Yes, I had to lie, even to my family. It is in the business of informing and dealing. Being disloyal comes with the territory. My friends, family, and lover are all awaiting trial because of me." He named more than 60 criminals, ranging from millionaire master villain Mickey Green to part-time drug mule Tracy Kirby, a former Page 3 model. His information included names like Kenneth Noy, Ronnie Knight, and Charlie Wilson, and the details he revealed became a blueprint for a series of criminal prosecutions on a vast scale. In 6 completed trials, 34 defendants have been convicted and sentenced to terms ranging from 12 months to 21 years. Their sentences added up to 170 years. Only now can Michael's story be told, because security considerations led to gagging orders and trials under armed guard at Woolwich Crown Court. Michael, also known as Constantine, needed security. Underworld paymasters had put a £4 million price on his head, but he took a calculated risk when he decided to turn informer. When customs raided his home in Radlett, Herefordshire, he was carrying a gun. He had cash and other assets worth £1.6 million to hand, and he had accounts and contract books detailing his drugs and prostitution dealings. It all added up to a prison sentence with little change out of the 20 years. Even under that kind of pressure, Michael cut an attractive deal. His wife Lynn, brother Xanthos, and top lieutenant Janice Marlborough, all implicated by him, also turned Queen's evidence. Package Michael negotiated guarantees new identities for himself and his immediate family, $19,000 a year for his wife to run a new home, $1,000 a month for their children's school fees, a £6,000 loan, and £10,000 cash for a new car. His friends estimate that in all, he will benefit by around £2 million from public funds, although even this does not compare to the fortune he was amassing from drugs and his massage parlour girls. The girls operated in a chain of saunas ran by Michael and his associates and earned him an estimated £500,000 per year. He was making even more out of drugs, which his gang brought into Britain from Holland to be stored before sale in warehouses, mainly in the Hatfield area. The couriers, who included his mother, wife, brother and lover, never carried less than £250,000 each on every trip, and in one 12-month period, 21 articulated lorries, 3 tourist coaches, and numerous cars crossed the channel laden with cannabis and cocaine. After the drugs were sold, the cash was delivered to Michael and either laundered through the Bureau de Change in Edgware or changed into high domination notes and sent back with couriers to Spain, Holland and France. It took 250 interviews with customs and police to unravel the information Michael offered. But despite the unparalleled scale of the arrests and prosecutions that followed, the Michael affair was not quite the triumph investigators had hoped for. A customs source said, "We were very successful in catching and convicting people below Michael in the chain of command because we had corroborative evidence from documents and accounts we seized when we arrested him. But when it came to those above him, we only had his word for it." The opinion of senior Treasury counsel was that we could not get convictions based solely on one man's word. One man named by Michael was Mickey Green, the Wembley mob armed robber turned drug dealer, wanted in 4 countries. Mr. Green was named as the man behind the gangland assassination of Underworld figures Gilbert Winter and Solly Nahome. Michael also accused Noel Purcell and Ian Davenport of being UK-based drug dealers. He spoke of dealing with Spanish-based suppliers Clifford Wheeler and Stephen McGoldrick, described in court as men of utmost violence. He named Cliff Hobbs, who was said to have sent the drugs to Britain via France. But after 6 trials, just when it seemed these big players were about to face justice, the process came to an abrupt halt. Mr. Green was freed in June when the charges were dropped. In July, charges were dropped against Mr. McGoldrick, Detective Constable Paul Carpenter, on £50,000 bail, and accused in court of being one of the most corrupt officers ever to serve in the Met, also had charges dropped. Warrants had been issued for the arrest of Mr. Wheeler, Mr. Davenport, and Mr. Hobbs, but Customs say that now, after the end of Operation Draft, they are not actively pursuing them. Michael's role as an informer is not over yet. He gave evidence via video link in an appeal court, claiming that he was asked to act as a middleman in a £1 million attempt to nobble the Guinness jewellery. The Guinness 4, Ernest Saunders, Gerald Ronson, Anthony Parnes, Sir Jack Lyons, were convicted in 1990 over an alleged fraudulent share support scheme in the takeover battle for distillers in 1986. Michael told the court he was approached by a villain known as Paul Maguire, who told him he had a relative on the jury who was open to a bribe. Mr. Maguire had earlier told the court he had not spoken to Michael about a juror at all, to which the country's most prolific and bestrewed Supergrass replied he did. Darren Maffrin was facing 16 years in jail for conspiracy to murder when the police offered him a deal, a new life and identity in return for becoming Britain's first Supergrass in a predominantly minority community. It was a disaster waiting to happen. After his conviction in a murder, Darren Maffrin told the police he was prepared to give information on gangland murders and details of his own lifetime of robbery, drug dealing and gang-related violence. Jamal Moore and his friend, Sean Stefanis, had been celebrating at a family party near Willesden Green in northwest London at about 11:30 p.m. on that January evening in 2005. Mr. Stefanis left the address, driven off in a taxi. Grainy CCTV footage recovered later by the police showed 4 hooded men walking in the darkness towards the house. The men see the taxi pass by. They then move off camera, continuing towards the house. They had come in search of Mr. Stefanis, but once there they spotted the 24-year-old Mr. Moore and instead turned on him. He was with his girlfriend getting a case of beer from his car. 3 guns blazed and 16 shots were fired, peppering the silver Renault Megane. The dramatic CCTV footage then shows the 4 men running away, at least one of them still carrying a gun, glinting in the streetlights. Although hit by 5 bullets, Mr. Moore managed to dive away from the car and roll down a bank, followed by his uninjured girlfriend, lying at the bottom of the bank with his life ebbing away. Mr. Moore called 999 on his mobile phone. "I need an ambulance, quick," he groaned. "I've been shot. I'm in the back garden. Quick, please, I'm dying. Please help." He is then heard naming one of the shooters. "It was Rufus, you know. Rufus shot me." A male voice is heard saying that Mr. Moore's breathing is becoming more difficult, and then his girlfriend breaks down, crying and screaming, "Please help him. You can't leave me, Jamal." On the face of it, this was just another brutal tit-for-tat killing between feuding gangs. But for the police officers from Operation Trident, who dealt exclusively with gun crime in London's black communities, it was a turning point. It was the moment they had found their first Supergrass, who was willing to expose the inner workings of the new wave of minority criminals. Darren Maffrin, who was 24, had driven the killers to the scene of Mr. Moore's murder. After reading a description of the van he had used in a local newspaper, Mr. Maffrin drove it to East London to burn it and destroy the fingerprint and DNA evidence. He doused the vehicle with petrol and lit it, but the explosion blew off his woolly hat and burnt his legs. He went to hospital by cab, with his legs poking out the window to cool them down and dull the pain. Police found Mr. Maffrin's DNA on the hat. They had already identified Rufus, the nickname for Roberto Parchment. On the night of the murder, both men had left their mobile phones switched on. allowing police to place them at the scene. After a 2-year investigation, Mr. Parchment and a third man, Romain White, were found guilty of killing Jamal Moore. Mr. Matherin was convicted of conspiracy to murder. 2 other men, Sean Bennett and a professional footballer, Gavin Grant, who played for Millwall and would later sign for Bradford City, were cleared. After his conviction, Mr. Matherin told the police he was prepared to give information on gangland murders and details of his own lifetime of robbery, drug dealing and gang-related violence. It was what the police had longed for, a chance to get inside a closed world. It was even hoped that he might set an example for others to follow, to cooperate with and give information to the police. But the plan was to backfire spectacularly, costing the taxpayers an estimated £500,000. Mr. Matherin did not decide to help the authorities for alternative reasons. The simple fact was that he'd finally become a victim of what he called his dog-eat-dog world. To get his sentence reduced and avoid leaving prison a middle-aged man, he was prepared to portray his former friends and associates. The vast majority of previous Supergrasses had not been implicated in murder cases. Deals were normally hammered out after a criminal had been arrested, but before they were put on trial, as well as becoming the first Trident Supergrass. Mr. Matherin is also believed to be the first person to get such a deal after being found guilty. Approval for this unusual move was given by the then Director of Public Prosecutions, Ken MacDonald, and was a sign of the government's determination to make inroads into tackling the escalating problem of black-on-black shootings. But the deal has since turned sour, much to the embarrassment of the police and the prosecutors. He was a disaster in front of the juries, admitted one Trident officer. If you'd like to know the full, in-depth story of what happened in this case, we have a documentary on our channel, so check it out when you get time. Derek Crichton Bertie Smalls was considered by many to be Britain's first Supergrass. Although there have been many informants throughout history, the Cray twins were partly convicted 2 years before Mr. Smalls gave evidence by Leslie Payne. The case of Mr. Smalls was significant for 3 reasons. The first informer to give the police volumes of names of his associates and provide the evidence that would send dozens of them to prison to serve long sentences. He was the first criminal informer to strike a written deal with the Director of Public Prosecutions and the only criminal informer to serve no time for his crime in return for providing Queen's evidence. In 1972, Sir Robert Mark became Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. That year, the annual total of armed robberies in the Metropolitan District was 380, partly because the culture was rife with bribe taking, sharing of the proceeds of crime, and verbaling, or fabricating evidence against suspects. Sir Robert felt compelled to remind his detectives which side of the law they were supposed to be on. He told them in his inaugural address, "A good police force is one that catches more criminals than it employs." At the centre of Sir Robert's focus was the Criminal Investigation Department and its principal, the Flying Squad. Ken Durry, commander of the Flying Squad, and one of his inspectors, Alistair Ingram, later went to prison for corruption. Sir Robert pushed such investigation of names such as Mehmet Arif, George Davis, Ronnie Knight, Freddie Foreman, Mickey McAvoy out to the suburban regions, who needed to employ new tactics to catch the bigger criminals they now faced. Derek Crichton Bertie Smalls was born in the East End of London and was a career criminal. On the 9th of February 1970, Mr. Smalls led a team of robbers from the Wembley mob, including Mickey Green, on an insider-led raid on a branch of Barclays Bank at 144 High Road, Ilford. The gang got away with £237,736, which at the time was a record. Most of the team left England via various routes. Mr. Smalls via a ferry from Newhaven to Dieppe, a train to Paris, and then a flight to Torremolinos for the Costa del Sol. where they read the English newspapers for updates on the police search for them. After making an early breakthrough where an informant provided the names of every member of the gang, the police case cooled until the robbers slowly returned to Britain. Mr. Smalls was caught in a suburb of Northampton and spent Christmas in the police custody of London. On the 2nd of January, Mr. Smalls asked for a meeting with the lead inspector. In the conversation, Mr. Smalls, having been informed by his solicitor that he would be serving at least 25 years if convicted, offered the police a deal to name and incriminate those involved, not only in the Barclays bank job, but in every piece of criminal activity he had ever been involved or known of. The agreement was drawn up between Mr. Smalls and the Director of Public Prosecutions, Sir Norman Skelhorn, that gave Mr. Smalls immunity from prosecution in exchange for his help. Jack Slipper was also involved in debriefing and the subsequent handling. On the 11th of February 1974, the trial commenced at the Old Bailey, Court Number 2, the Wembley mob in relation to the Barclays Bank robbery. Mr. Smalls duly gave evidence and assisted the authorities, as he concluded his evidence against some of his former friends. In one of the committal hearings, they sang to him the Vera Lynn song, "We'll Meet Again, Don't Know Where, Don't Know When." On the 20th of May, the trial finished, the jury returning guilty verdicts on all participants on the 22nd of May. In total, the judge handed out sentences totaling 106 years, with Mr. Green alone jailed for 18 years. In the following 14 months, Mr. Small's evidence convicted a further 21 associates for a total of 308 years. Mr. Smalls also later ensured the release of Jimmy Saunders, jailed by DCI Bert Wicksteed for his part in the 1970 Ilford robbery, after a statement in which he said Mr. Saunders was not part of the gang. In the aftermath and reflection of the Mr. Smalls deal, the law lords told the Director of Public Prosecutions that they found the arrangement with Mr. Smalls an unholy deal. Later, Supergrasses such as Maurice Mahoney in 1974, then one of Britain's most violent armed robbers, who turned in more than 150 names in exchange for a much reduced sentence, couldn't escape prison if they had committed serious crimes. Owen Mahoney faced a minimum of 20 years, but was sentenced eventually to 5 years. The Supergrass system was taken to its principal by a Metropolitan Police officer named the Supergrass Master, running the system from Finchley, DCI Tony Lundy. From 1977, Mr. Lundy often had 4 trials per week running, but met his match in Michael Skinny Gervais, the leader of the 24th of March 1980 silver bullion robbery, then the largest in the UK. The team got away with 321 ingots of silver, valued at £3.4 million, being transferred from Samuel Montagu and Co. Bank to Germany. After interviewing Mr. Gervais, the team were led on the 4th of June 1980 to a stack of 309 silver ingots. Mr. Gervais later alleged that Mr. Lundy was close to Lenny Gibson. The pair were members of the same boxing club, who had supplied police uniforms for the raid via Mr. Lundy. Mr. Lundy was returned to the reformed flying squad and, after a 2-year investigation, fully cleared. In its conclusion to the Lundy report, the police authority concluded Mr. Lundy's team had got too close to the criminals. Evidence came for this from statistics for armed robbery in the metropolitan area. In 1972, the annual total of armed robberies in the metropolitan district was 380. The year after Mr. Smalls gave his evidence, it had been reduced to 168. By 1978, it had risen to 734, and by 1982, it had doubled to 1,772, a 366% increase in a decade. The flying squad was revived to centralise specialist robbery squads and to improve technical surveillance and the provision of police tactical firearms units. As part of his deal with the police, Mr. Smalls received a new identity. Within a few years of the trial, he had returned to his old haunts in North London, drinking openly in pubs around Hornsey and often boasting he was paid £25 a week by Scotland Yard for his betrayal. He died in January 2008 at his home in Croydon, South London. Bobby King, one of the robbers, his evidence convicted, and who was later held up as an example of the positive side of prison, once saw him in Crouch End, but said he saw it as a test of his rehabilitation that he didn't whack Mr. Smalls. In 1988, DCSI Tony Lundy retired aged 49 to the Costa del Sol for a quiet retirement, where one of his neighbours was Mickey Green, by then Britain's most wanted criminal and biggest drug dealer. In 2005, the UK government passed the Serious Organised Crime Act, which includes a tariff for informants. Even today, people who grass about minor things are said to be doing a Bertie Smalls.
Hoddesdon and the village of Broxbourne next to it are right on the border of Essex and Hertfordshire. In spring 1985, a chance discovery outside a bungalow called Emerald set off an extraordinary chain of events. One of the schoolboys who made the discovery has since been identified only as Witness A.
I want that thing out of the house. Just throw it away. It's revolting.
As soon as I opened it, I could see the way it was laid out, by the firing pin mainly. On night exercises, we used tripwire alarms to let off 12-bore blanks. They worked more or less on the same principle. The electronics were exactly the same as my radio-controlled car. I knew Mum and Dad wouldn't believe me. I think it was mainly because I didn't understand how it worked. I started taking it apart, but I could never get it to work, so it never got put back together, and bits were gradually thrown away.
And then they try to ambush the security van when it arrives. We've reconstructed their most recent raid, where this time they did succeed and they got away with £90,000. Imperial Cold Stores was a depot for hops en route from Kent to breweries in the Midlands. Friday was wages day.
Do you know what this is? It's a remote control unit. And it works this. At the touch of a button, it goes off.
You open this bloody door! I can't open your bloody head off! I can't open it!
And also of a son born this year. Derek Hutton is Labour's deputy leader of Liverpool City Council, which, in case you haven't heard...
Do you know what this is? It's a remote control unit. And it works this. At the touch of a button, it goes off.
Mum! Mum! Mum, can I have a look at this?
What you going to do is take your mate out some tea, get him out.
What are you watching?
It's Crime Watch. You must have taped that as well.
Blow your back out, understand?
Hang on, I'll rewind it.
It's a remote control unit. And it works this. At the touch of
Look
a
there,
button, it goes
it's that
off.
bomb thing, you know. Like the one I found. It is, isn't it? Will you let me ring him up? Go on, let me ring him up.
No, just play the tape, Paul. Let's watch the programme before you get overexcited.
On the night of the programme itself, I think we received somewhere in the region of 60 to 70 calls at the studio. And it was probably 2 or 3 days before I received a telephone call from Hoddesdon Police, who told us about this young boy that had told them he had found an identical device in a rubbish sack some months before.
I don't know if I'll get all the detail of that.
Just do what you can remember, Paul. I was a bit sceptical that the lad may have been making the information up, having seen the programme, but he drew the 4 corner posts to the box, which at that stage finally convinced me that what he had in fact seen was the bomb that was used at the Cross and Herbert's robbery.
From April 1985, we identified a particular gang from description, from their method, attacking premises early in the morning, taking staff hostage at gunpoint, intent clearly upon stealing the contents of the security van. But in 2 of those offences, an exploding device was used. It was a viable device, although we are not, of course, showing you all of it here. It was indeed fortuitous that the family of this young boy had videoed the Crime Watch programme, and that he, that evening, whilst at random flicking through, happened to latch on to the very point in your film where you displayed this exploding device. And that gave us an address. In fact, it gave us Emerald to concentrate upon. Emerald is in a very desirable area of Hertfordshire. It's in Broxbourne, in a road called Riverside.
As far as the local officers were concerned, they had no personal knowledge of either the previous owner or the current owner. As far as the previous owner was concerned, we had a family which had moved very recently to a more expensive house, and we were also able to establish that the previous owner had his own electrical company, which again we thought may be the possible link between him and the explosive device. We decided to come down, sit outside early in the morning and note the comings and goings from the premises, in the hope that by doing that we may be able to find some association with him and people that possibly known to us as being involved in robberies in some way. And I was certainly convinced that we were on the right track, and it was just a case of sticking with it.
As the flying squad continued the inquiries in London, events in Harlow in Essex added a new and even more serious dimension to the investigation.
Good night.
Good night, guys.
See you in the morning.
One does take different routes to work, or if a car is behind you for a little bit more than normal, one does tend to go round a block once or twice. When one does see robberies on television, it does tend to make you a little bit more cautious. When I came into the room, I saw this man over there and another one behind me with a shotgun. They made me sit in a chair, handcuffed me. And then I saw my wife and daughter handcuffed to the table over there.
Can you imagine that there's a knock on the door? They're waiting for, the wife waiting for her husband, Joe, to return. And at 7 o'clock, there's a knock on the door. And when it's opened, in rush the villains. Balaclavas, shotguns, the lot. That alone must have been frightening. But then to sit Mrs. Symes down and her daughter, to handcuff them and say, we're waiting for your husband, nothing will happen, be quiet. And there's more arrived with guns, must have been very traumatic and very frightening indeed.
At first he said, well, you obviously realise what we're here for. And they said, we want you to take us up there in the morning and open the safe up so we can help ourselves.
During the course of the night, and prior to the villains leaving the house, they bound Mrs. Symes and her daughter to the bed and gagged them and left them in that state. Mrs. Symes and the daughter find it very, very difficult to talk about their experience of what went on that night. And I don't think they ever will.
One of them produced a box with a red light on it attached to a belt, which they said was a bomb, which they could control would be controlled by remote control. They suggested in the morning you would stick it under the seat of your car, and if I did not do anything, they they want it, you know, they'd detonate it. A few minutes to 6 o'clock, Bill Borman arrived and he had Steve Perry with him, another chap. They got out their car, he locked his car, and I got out of mine. Said, "Morning," and I locked the outer gate.
They then instructed Joe to open up the inner doors, and it was from the strong room that some £500,000 was stolen.
They just raced in there, and after about 9-10 minutes at the most, one of them shouted, "This is it, lads," and they picked up what they had, locked us in the safe and went.
As far as I know, this was the biggest robbery Essex had had, and it's unfortunate to say, even taking into account all the hard work that had been done, we were getting nowhere.
I was seconded out to Essex for almost a week because obviously there were certain aspects of that robbery which were very, very similar to the 4 we had already linked.
On this occasion, a depot was robbed. The device that was used was a mock-up device, and what struck us was that perhaps the gang had seen the Crime Watch programme and in fact involved in copycat tactics.
I personally at that time wasn't convinced it was connected with the robberies we were already dealing with. I was always aware that that offence had been committed, but there seemed to have been a lot more planning, and it seemed very strange to me that a team that had been using a viable device on the robberies would then switch to a dummy device.
So, uncertain whether the armour guard robbery was by the same gang, detectives continued occasional observation on both the previous and the current occupants of Emerald.
As you can see from the location of Emerald, it made it very difficult for us to actually sit down here and watch anything for a long period of time. It's a private road, cul-de-sac, so all we really had to rely on was the occasional drive-through and drive back again. And in fact it was on one of these drive-throughs early one morning on the way to work that there were 3 vehicles seen on the driveway: a Porsche, an Audi GT and a Nissan Sunny Estate. Checks on that vehicle revealed that it belonged to a Dolly Ince, who we knew was married to George Ince, a man known to us as having a conviction for a serious armed robbery.
Dolly Ince previously was Dolly Cray and married to Charles Cray, the brother of the Cray twins. George Ince, in 1973, was convicted of armed robbery at the Old Bailey.
George Ince left for his wedding from Wormwood Scrubs prison, where he's in the 4th year of a 15-year sentence for a bullion robbery. It's a crime his supporters say he didn't commit, but today there were no demonstrations. The 2 prison officers escorting the groom wore civilian clothes, and a raincoat, clearly unnecessary on a hot, fine day, hid the handcuffs which held Mr. Ince captive. The bride had arrived a few minutes before. It was her evidence about their love affair which cleared George Ince of killing a Mrs. Muriel Patience in what became known as the Barn murder case, before he was convicted in another case for robbery.
The apparent link between George Ince and the people now living at Emerald suggested the detectives' first hunch had been wrong. The new residents suddenly began to look far more interesting to police than the previous ones.
Our discovery on the 4th of February of that year changed the direction of our inquiry, inasmuch that we were able completely to clear the previous occupant of the property. He comes out of our inquiry whiter than white. If ever he wants a reference, he can come to me and get the flying squad seal of approval. And we were then looked much, much more closely at the new occupant, David Krogh. David and Rita Krogh, when we looked at them first of all, had convictions for minor shoplifting, and although we could never identify his occupation, we had no reason to identify him as an armed robber. We, of course, could not move at that stage against the Kroghs. All we had was mere suspicion, and that is obviously not sufficient in law. All we would do is alert people that we are maintaining an interest in them, and our inquiries moved to a closer surveillance.
Stand by. Green car, possibly a Golf, left out of Riverside, towards the car park. Bob, can you get a close look at that vehicle and confirm who's in it? I think target one's the passenger, can't see who the driver is. When we saw Croak as the passenger in a very expensive limited edition VW Golf, initially we were unable to identify who the owner of that Golf was.
I was aware that a man by the name of Donald Barrett was using the vehicle. Now, some 6 or 7 years previous, I had in fact had personal dealings with Barrett when he was arrested for a series of armed robberies. He was subsequently accepted as a Supergrass, and I knew that he was at that time out of prison, having been released some months previous.
We had to move into a proactive role. Here was a man who was one of the foremost armed robbers in London, clearly capable of committing all the offences that we had linked, and also the armour guard offence.
Target vehicle is past the dog's home, and it's a stop. And the driver's out of the vehicle. It's definitely target 2. He's wearing a light shirt, dark tie, and jeans. He's back to the vehicle, and it's an off.
The all units, hold back. I think this is a cul-de-sac. The all units, contact with the target vehicle. They're into the one-way system. They're following the system round. And he's coming out, back towards you.
It was on one of these occasions that a team of us took Barrett and Croak down to an area of Battersea, and in fact onto an industrial estate, which we later found contained a security depot, which we believe that they were in fact looking at.
From our observations, it was clear that they were planning to rob a security depot called Shield, which is in the Nine Elms area of Battersea. And if they are sophisticated enough and have the ability to attack and rob such a depot, it's fair to assume that in fact they were the team who committed the armour guard robbery.
Travelling to Faro today, are you? You're travelling to Faro today?
Yeah.
Yes, OK. I'd like to put your bags on the scales. As Barrett flew out of the country on holiday, detectives were still preparing for a robbery any day on the depot at Battersea.
Hello.
I was out that day really just to have a good look at the depot and the surrounding area. And I recognised the red Golf as being a vehicle registered to what I thought was an associate of David Croak. And it struck me at the time that perhaps this team of robbers had actually someone working in Shield.
Our concentration on Emerald has now yielded David Croak, Donald Barrett, and then yielded for us Alan Turner. Interesting chap, Al Turner, because we identified that he lived in Clacton, visited Emerald, and turned up at the depot at Battersea, clearly employed at that establishment. It was clear that they had an inside agent at that depot.
Hello?
It's Dave Croak.
Listen, if Don rings, tell him the run's on and it's...
Double bubble. You got that?
Yeah, OK, I got it. I'll tell him. See you then.
When preparing for a plot of this nature, certainly I have to be aware not to do anything which may possibly alert the people that are going to be concerned in the robbery. which therefore, in this case, meant I couldn't go anywhere on that estate to try and find suitable premises from which we could conduct an observation. Also, I had to consider, in the event of any attack being given, that people may scatter, and as you can see here, the railway lines. Hence, I went straight to the pub at the end of the road, which was ideally suited for giving us a view.
Yes, Don, he said the run's on. OK, I'll tell him you're coming back.
DC Shapland and my other officers were feeding back intelligence, and the picture was developing that really we think the operation was going to actually take place. And so, with that in mind, we assumed that the target premises was going to be Shield Security. Now, this area here is the Nine Elms area of Battersea. It's an industrial estate, as you'll see. That there is Nine Elms Police Station. I had 3 observation posts, one just out of shot here, which was a public house that gave me good vision onto the area here at the front of Shield. This was where I personally was, and I had line of sight right the way through and could see any activity down here and people arriving. And the police station provided an ideal opportunity to see the vehicles coming in and out. There's only one way in through there and one way out through there, so that gave me line of sight on people coming in and people going out. So by the Sunday night, things were really beginning to happen. Barrett had suddenly come back from holiday. That was significant in itself. And then we see Croak and Barrett are followed down to Turner's address in Essex. Now, that had to be a planning meeting. They were there a few hours and came back. And by 10 o'clock or so, they're back at Broxbourne. We put them to bed, and I maintain a 24-hour observation on them. We knew from their activities at Armour Guard that we had a possible hostage situation here, and this was very much like Armour Guard. And therefore, my planning for this operation was very much a containment one. Let the suspects come in and then seal off the area. Because of the potential for hostage, as there's been with this and other offences, I deployed the PT-17, the Tactical Firearms Unit, the Blue Berets, who were very skilled at that sort of idea. Hostage situation could be protracted. We needed their skills and firepower if necessary. I deployed as my second option officers of the flying squad who were skilled in mobile and in surveillance with their other support units from New Scotland Yard, in order that if there was to be a breakout or they were to move from here, I had an ability to follow and to arrest elsewhere. And by the early hours of the Monday morning, I had deployed something like 80 officers, and radio silence was being maintained. And then our first indication was on the Monday morning at about 4:20 a.m, very early and very significantly, Barrett and Croak were out.
The 2 main suspects left home on foot, leaving their nice cars at home sort of thing, and went to a lock-up garage and took out an old van and started travelling towards Battersea. That's the first time that I felt that it was really going to be on that day.
Provided we can get rid of this condensation, everything will be fine.
I don't really think I want to eat anyway.
So in the early hours of the morning, Barrett and Croak are on their way down, travelling south towards us. Our first real sign of any real activity is about 5:45, when Turner himself comes round here, onto the estate.
Stand by. Turner's just arrived in his GTI. He's reversing, parking next to the hamburger stall. Wait a minute. Yeah, he's out the vehicle. Where's he going? Wait a minute. Yeah, he's gone out my sight now.
A few minutes later, Turner's co-driver for Shield Security was seen from the observation post to come in and take the same route as Turner and come and park beside him here.
Stand by. This is the known employee. He's out of the vehicle. Turner's approaching him. They're both talking by the side of the known employee's vehicle.
Just at about 6 a.m, the real event happened was that Croak and Barrett had been followed right the way down and were seen to come through past the observation post and enter.
As soon as that van arrived in the area of Battersea and went on round to where the Shield depot was, the mood changed completely. and everybody became geared up, ready for an attack to be given if necessary.
I don't think there's any doubt you do get nervous. I don't think you'd be human if you didn't get nervous when you know you've got suspects, armed suspects, coming on when you're sitting waiting for them. Yes, you do get very nervous.
Suddenly, I get a coded message from my observation post here that the blue escort van with Croak and Barrett actually leaves the estate and goes and parks nearby.
There's a arriving. Stand by. Driver's reversing. He's out of the vehicle. He's been joined by the other two and towards the front door now. They're in the front gate. Yes, and they're now into the premises, all into the premises. The known employee and the known target are out of the premises. The known target is carrying a small shoe-type box. And the target is into the vehicle. The vehicle's reversing. Now off the front yardage, towards Tom, and it's a right, and off.
Because suddenly it didn't look as if the depot was going to be the actual target premises. Now that gave me a real problem, simply because I had a vehicle with perhaps a considerable amount of valuable commodity on board, money, cash, gold, and two armed robbers in the near vicinity.
You get a feeling of indecisiveness. You don't know, has the job been called off, or what?
I decided that I would deploy officers that I had, flying squad officers, in the vicinity to make up a convoy to follow the target vehicle wherever it was going to go.
All the plans we've made have gone, really, because although we did have the surveillance as a backup, we were 99% sure it was going to be the depot. And then we've got to start hounding round for troops to follow the convoy wherever it was going. Disappointment for me, because I thought we were going to take them at the depot. I really thought they were there to the depot and it was going to be nice.
We've got the van with the two guards in and the gold, which is being followed by the van with the two suspects in, which is being followed by the surveillance team.
Nobody knew where they were going to go. And I remember thinking to myself as we rounded Hyde Park Corner sort of thing and went up, what's the name of the road?
The Edgware Road.
The Edgware Road, thank you. Where are we going to go to now? You just didn't know, and it went on and on and on, and there in the distance was the bullion vehicle, followed by the suspects. You're just in the lap of the gods, really, to see what's going to happen.
You could be a half a mile behind and still see this bright white van followed by a tiny blue one behind it all the way. Going up the motorway was a little bit unusual for us, because usually a lot of our work is in town. I don't think the blue van had a vehicle in between the security vehicle all the way up.
We obviously knew we were at Newport Pagnell on the motorway. We were pulled up on the hard shoulder, probably about a quarter of a mile to half a mile short of the service area, although we were in radio contact with the surveillance officers and we knew exactly what was going on within the area, service area itself.
All units, guard out towards the restaurant area. Target vehicle is stationary in the car park. Stand by. Targets 1 and 2, both out of the van and towards the restaurant.
You could hear that there had been a meet between the driver of the bullion vehicle and the suspects.
Guards into the building. 1 and 2 under control. One and 2 back towards their vehicle.
Stand by. Guard, back to the car park.
Once it comes to the moment where they're going to rob the van, I think they get what can best be described as tunnel vision. And at that stage, they're completely oblivious of what's going on around them. They've just got one goal in life, and that is to rob the van or rob whatever they're after.
Shortly after that, you could hear that one of the suspects was in fact driving the bullion vehicle and leaving the slip road onto the motorway.
Definitely target one, driving the security van.
And it was at that stage that Mr. Grange gave the attack.
It's a build-up of adrenaline, it's a build-up of nerves, and then when you get the attack, it's released. I don't know what the other chaps feel, but I haven't really felt anything else like it, to go across the pavement and nick a team of armed robbers.
It's very difficult to describe because you're moving very, very quickly, but once it's all over, once you've got them down the ground, handcuffed, you've got their guns away from them, then it's a feeling of relief more than anything, the fact that you're not hurt and nobody else is hurt and they are nicked.
When you saw him standing there, he was exceptionally cool, calm and collected. There's no other way to describe him, really. I mean, he seemed the business, I think. It really seemed very professional.
And I'll never forget the first words he said to one of the officers who he knew. He said, "Hello, Phil. Nice little tickle you've had here." And that was on the M1 with firearms all around, vehicles buzzing up and down, and he recognised an officer and basically congratulated him for the work he'd done.
I then went further back down the motorway to where Croak was being dealt with. And then we made arrangements for them to be photographed and taken into the local police station.
By 2 o'clock that day, officers had arrived at Emerald. Rita Croak was just leaving with a shotgun cartridge and a CS gas gun. She was taken to Milton Keynes police station and initially charged with conspiracy to rob. The 2 security guards had been handcuffed in the van during the robbery. One was entirely innocent. The other, Al Turner, turned out to be Rita's son. He was later charged with robbery and firearms offences. David Croak was also taken to Milton Keynes police station and charged with robbery and firearms offences. But attention now centred on Donald Barrett. If police were to find evidence on other offences or to arrest any other members of the robbery team, then it would be through him. The question was, could Donald Barrett become the first person in British criminal history to become a Supergrass for the second time?
Well, following his arrest, we realised that here we had something very important, that this team were responsible for a whole series of sophisticated and very violent crimes. And the idea he could provide us a link. We asked him whether he would cooperate, and he said yes.
Mr. Grange is upstairs. We might as well go up and see him now.
Yeah,
I'll come back to you later, okay?
Yeah. Whilst he was in Newport Pagnell, I, in London, began the process of seeing the senior police officers at New Scotland Yard and the Director of Public Prosecutions to get their agreement. It wasn't an easy decision because he'd been a resident informant, a Supergrass, as you would want to call him, in the past. Here was an absolute unique occasion of a man who could be taken on board as a resident informant for a second occasion. Never been done before.
Right from the start, the arrest on the M1, Barrett showed great concern as to what was going to happen to him. Being an ex-Supergrass, where were they going to put him? Where could he go in the system?
There were 2 things that must have been paramount in Barrett's mind. One was how to keep himself safe, and 2, the least possible sentence.
Also in his mind was that Croak may wish to become a resident informant. He based that on Croak having asked him many questions about how he was dealt with previously as a Supergrass. He had to basically, I think, get in first.
Barrett had served his previous sentence apart from other prisoners in the Supergrass wing at Bedford Prison. But he knew that he could only get that protection again if he were to have the same status.
It's clear that he was going to go to prison for a long time and would be rubbing shoulders, perhaps with people against whom he gave evidence in the past. Those people would, without doubt, take his life. Donald Barrett could never live through a prison sentence. He wouldn't even get to trial.
From a special incident room, 12 detectives began to re-investigate the offences and criminals Barrett was telling them about.
Certainly the first 6 months of the inquiry were the most intense. From Dick and my point of view, we were continually in and out of this room, which we endearingly called the bunker, into the unit next door where Barrett was kept.
Ironically, that was the same special unit Barrett had been in 8 years before. Including the Armour Guard robbery and the one shown on Crime Watch, Barrett admitted his part in 11 crimes, worth £1.4 million. On one occasion, the gang had restolen some of the Brinksmat gold. They threatened people with explosives and doused a man with petrol. Among 13 other people arrested on Barrett's word was Glenn Armsby, who lived with Rita Croke's daughter and was the third member of the gang who'd held Joe Symes and his family hostage. George Ince was arrested and held for a number of weeks before all charges were dropped and he was released. His wife, Dolly, never featured in the police inquiry.
You get to the stage where the information concerning the offences have run out and you're left with what to talk about. Personally, I found it was quite easy with Barrett because he's been around for a long time. But then again, so have I. And we had a lot of mutual criminals in common that we could talk about.
There is a very real danger. It's described as the Stockholm Syndrome, where the hostages and the hostage takers get so very close. In this case, we have got the prisoner and the police officers.
There's a real presence about him, and almost like a caged tiger in many ways. But for all that, we're able eventually, over a period of time, to work together very effectively.
The detective officers who have the investigation of the offences do not have the care and custody of the Supergrass. In fact, the Supergrass is looked after by uniformed officers who work under strict Home Office guidelines.
The way that the courts treat the evidence of the Supergrass, quite rightly, is very sceptically. And we then had to set about to corroborate all the aspects that Barrett told us about. And that took us all around the country. It took us to France, took us to Malta. So it was important that what he said, we were able, in some other way, to prove or corroborate.
David had gone out to Malta after Armour Guard. Someone called Victor looked after his flat and boat. The boat was originally called Armour Guard or something like that.
Detectives went to Malta and searched the Crokes' flat there. Among other evidence, they found the boat Barrett had mentioned. It had been repainted, but the name Croke had rather foolishly given it showed up under ultraviolet light.
Having checked the obvious that Armag wasn't a local Maltese word, we now had this excellent corroboration of what Barrett had already told us in his statement, and would later be giving evidence in any court proceedings.
I've been asked about a bank account held by David Croke at the Bank of Ireland, Seven Sisters Road. The account was in the name of T. Moore. I had some cheques from this account signed by Croke in the name T. Moore.
We recovered a great deal of correspondence in the name of T. Moore and David Croke in a briefcase. We also went to the Bank of Ireland, and there we saw all the evidence recorded in the bank statements, paying in slips and cheques, which completely corroborated what Don Barrett in fact had told us. From this wealth of evidence, we're able to prepare a picture which shows David Croke's finances. The blue column shows what Don Barrett says their share of cash was, and the pink column shows what cash is shown as being paid into the bank account. These two columns here we relate to the offence at Armour Guard, where Don Barrett says that David Croke had about £140,000 as their share of the robbery, and the pink column clearly shows that about £140,000 was indeed paid into Croke's bank account.
Barrett was also required to confront his former accomplices before giving evidence against them in court.
Gentlemen, for the sake of the tape recorder, would you please identify yourselves?
D.C. Cuthbertson. Donald Barrett.
D.C. Shapland.
Mr. Barrett, can you identify this man in the corner?
Yes, I can.
Who is he?
Dave Croke.
Now, bearing in mind that you're still under caution, Mr. Barrett, between the 11th and the 12th of December 1985, there was a family by the name of Symes taken hostage, followed by a robbery at the Armour Guard depot at the Pinnacles, Harlow. Were you involved in that, Mr. Barrett?
Yes.
Who else was involved?
Dave Croke, Glenn Armsby.
Anything you want to say about that, Mr. Croke? Mr. Croke doesn't wish to say anything. The main man, David Croke, in this case, really said not one word when he was being interrogated. In fact, I think the only thing that he said to me during a tape-recorded interview was, "I want my solicitor to be here," when he decided he didn't like the way that I was asking questions of him. But that was all, and yet Croak pleaded guilty to a number of very, very substantial robberies.
Rita Croak also knew that Barrett would testify against her, and she pleaded guilty to the single charge of possessing a prohibited weapon.
What it's also been able to do for us as professional detectives is actually give us an insight how the criminals actually work, how they plan, incredible, meticulous planning, certainly in relation to armour guard.
The armour guard job was a year in the planning, although we did do other robberies during that time. I went there in a vehicle with Dave in the boot, with holes in it for him to see what was going on. We used a Honda van with boxes in the back. During this time, we got to know the key holders, Bill Warman and Joe Symes. Dave suggested we should go into Warman's address the night before and hold the family hostage. But this had to be a sweet job, and you simply can't wrap up kids. Although the research on Warman took 2.5 to 3 months, we had to scrap it. Dave said the only other way to do it was to plot up on the other key holder, Joe Symes.
Over a period of many months, Barrett made detailed allegations about the involvement of other well-known London criminals in various robberies. In many of those cases, police could not corroborate Barrett's allegations against the people he named.
It's not for us to say that people are guilty, although if it were, I can promise you that the streets of London will be safe from crime. But you get a feeling that, especially when there is evidence available that people, like some of those who got away, are guilty, and it's extremely annoying to think not so much that they've got away with the ones that you have arrested them for, but of course that they are free to go out and continue robbing.
One could imagine Donald Barrett, on release from prison, going to work, committing crime, work as he calls it, committing crime on his own, but working with other criminals who know that he has been a Supergrass. It's astounding, and very many of my colleagues have scratched their heads. But what is very clear is that there was a body of opinion amongst criminals that having once been a Supergrass, he could never, ever, ever be a Supergrass again. And they felt that in this case, that he was safer to indulge in criminality with than any other criminal.
I had a meet with at the Little Chef on the Great Cambridge Road. I'd known since 1979 in Maidstone. He said that if I ever informed on him, he'd plot up on me and kill me. He agreed to work with me and we discussed the job.
All right, Don, ready? Yeah. We used to transport Barrett every day from next door to the Old Bailey when he was giving evidence. And he was very uneasy about the giving of his evidence because he knew that the first part of his cross-examination by the defence barrister was going to be regarding his past and the horrendous crimes that he has committed in his past.
I've seen him give evidence in court, and he is very, very impressive. Well, let's say that Mr. Barrett looks the part. He's an extremely fit, hard man and has been for a long time. The sort of thing that people would expect an armed robber to look like.
In £500 suits.
Yes.
Barrett would probably spend more on a tie and handkerchief than I would spend on a suit. He always asks my opinion of what sentence he's going to get, because it's the only thing that preys on his mind. He can't think of anything else.
It's a very difficult decision. I keep saying the word, he's so unique. But personally, I see that the contribution he's made in removing the streets of London, making them much safer, that we need to take account. Also, the Supergrass trial itself, system, is actually on trial.
Certainly on the last occasion that Barrett was arrested and dealt with as a Supergrass, he was sentenced initially to a total of 14 years imprisonment. Now, at that particular time, there were quite a few Supergrasses in the system, and the norm of sentencing was within the region of 5 to 7 years. So at that time, Barrett's sentence was completely out of line with all the others. However, he did appeal against sentence, then in fact he was reduced to 7 years on appeal.
How long was he in for?
He was in custody altogether for somewhere in the region of about 3.5 to 4 years.
Some people would take the view that in light of the crimes that he has committed, perhaps accurately described as one stage from terrorism, that he should be sent away for the rest of his natural days.
I know some senior police officers and colleagues think that the terrible nature of the offences that Barrett has committed, and I don't minimise those whatsoever, he should in fact face the ultimate penalty in the sense of perhaps life imprisonment. I've already said that I don't think that that is appropriate in this case, because I think that we haven't marked the contribution he's made to crime reduction. So on the one scale we've got perhaps 5 years, which was the old maxim, and life on the other. And perhaps tomorrow the judge will view perhaps the middle range, somewhere around about that, as appropriate.
What is very important is that it's not shown in such a light that supergrasses that have been into the system and come out can then look at it and think, well, I've got carte blanche to go out and commit whatever offences I like, because all I have to do is turn supergrass again.
I think credit has got to be given, and it's got to be seen to be given, so that other people will do it in the future.
In the dock at the moment are Mr. Croak and Mr. Barrett, who've been listening intensely what's been going on. And we're in a position now where after lunch, and in fact just before lunch, the judge heard Mr. Julian Bevan acknowledge the contribution that in fact Barrett has made in the evidence that he's given and the information he's given. And this afternoon, myself and Detective Inspector Grange will go in and give some broad idea of the impact that the evidence that Barrett has given to us has meant to policing in London. And that's where I'm off to now.
Thanks very much.
Late yesterday afternoon, the judge retired. Because there's so many implications involved, and because it's been a very complicated case in many ways, it's absolutely right and proper that he should spend the night mulling over the sort of sentence that he's going to deliver this morning, which should have happened by now, and we'll find out exactly what's happened when the chaps come over. What's your poll?
Good result.
Oh, what happened?
The judge has had a sale. Croak, 23 years.
Housekeeper,
Yep.
Resident Sergeant, contact front office. Please.
Barrett with 50%, no, not 50, 25% reduction, 16 years.
16?
All in all, I think it's a fair result.
Yeah, it's, I thought that Barrett might have got a little less than that. And perhaps he will on appeal.
Indeed.
Yeah. As for Croak, I think a very good sentence, as far as the public is concerned.
Deserves every bit.
Yes.
It was like I spent just over 20 minutes with him.
Really?
And he's still in good spirits.
Yeah.
How are you? You heard the results? What do you think?
He's thanked us, we've thanked him, and that's really the end of the matter.
Yeah, nice commendation at the end. Mr. Grange, Paul, Dick, Ray, you, me, Neil Murphy and Colin Ellis for the surveillance at Newport Pagnell. It is. Nice result.
The end of a loyalist Supergrass trial that cost the taxpayer millions of pounds.
What's your reaction?
Supergrass systems.
Accident sucks. Got a justice today, lads. What's that, Paul?
9 men acquitted of murder after the testimony of 2 state witnesses, the Stewart brothers, was found to be infected with lies.
I think it would have been obvious to anyone examining the case in any kind of detail before the case was brought that this evidence wouldn't stack up in court, certainly to convict prisoners beyond reasonable doubt.
The failure of the modern-day Supergrass system could have serious implications for another case police are planning to bring involving a former Loyalist boss. Gary Haggerty is one of the highest-ranking Loyalists to turn Queen's evidence. He could implicate the entire top tier of the UVF, along with at least one police handler and their superiors.
If the Stuarts are at the bottom of that organisation, Haggerty was at the very top. And he could open doors into all sorts of places and all sorts of worlds that people don't want us to look into.
So what is being done to investigate those alleged to have colluded with killers? The UVF trial that ended in the acquittals of those charged with Tommy English's murder was the result of a groundbreaking report by the former police ombudsman Nuala O'Lone, known as the Ballast Report.
As a consequence of the practices of Special Branch, the position of the UVF, particularly in North Belfast and Newton Abbey, was consolidated and strengthened over the years.
The report examined a catalogue of killings of up to 15 people over a 10-year period, carried out by a UVF gang in North Belfast. Most significantly, the Ombudsman believed the gang was riddled with police informers. Nuala O'Lone recommended that 2 investigations be carried out as a matter of urgency. One into the Loyalists who carried out the murders, which led to the recent unsuccessful prosecutions, and the other into allegations that some police handlers and controllers may have allowed agents to get away with murder. Tonight, Spotlight can reveal that 5 years on, the investigation into allegations of police collusion appears to be going nowhere. Nuala O'Lone talks exclusively to us about her deep concerns over what she sees as her successor's failure to follow through on her recommendations to pursue those officers and their superiors who she suspected of colluding in murder.
I don't quite understand why no action was taken, because there actually is a statutory duty where there's a serious crime to investigate. My belief is that the current Ombudsman is under the same statutory obligations as I was, and that these matters should have been investigated. If you have police officers who are handlers or controllers who may have committed crime, that needs to be dealt with as a matter of priority. It really needs to be dealt with as a matter of priority, particularly where the crimes are murder.
The police ombudsman says all cases will be investigated and it operates in full compliance with its statutory duty. But how high did the alleged collusion with murder go? And what else do the Supergrasses have to reveal?
It's not just about the UVF, because these people may well be the puppets on the end of strings. Where do the strings lead? And who developed the practices and policies of that dirty war and that dirty place?
Halloween night 2000, traditionally a family time. In Newton Abbey, Tommy English and his wife were at home with their 3 young children. Tommy English was a one-time UDA boss in North Belfast who had recently become involved in the peace process. He was a prominent member of the UDP. Just after tea time, Tommy and his wife Doreen were watching television in the living room. Their children, aged 10 and under, were playing upstairs. Hearing a noise, Doreen English opened the back door to find a gang of men putting on masks, ready to sledgehammer their way into her house.
They were pushing me and shoving me and slapping me about with the guns to get out of the road, and just chaos, really. The biggest guy, he aimed the gun again, and I went for his face, just for his eyes, to try and stop him, seeing what he was doing. And after that, I was hitting the head and the face with the gun and punched it a few times.
Tommy English was shot in the back as he tried to run upstairs towards his children.
He stopped and sort of stared, and all of a sudden 2 men came to the bottom of the stairs, and it was really just bangs. You were hearing bangs and sort of blinking with the shock of the bang. And my dad started to fall backwards down the stairs. He landed in the hallway. They'd beaten my mum so bad, she was literally blood smeared all over her face, her clothes. We actually thought it was my dad's blood.
The gunman left, and Mark's young sister Charlize ran into the street.
I ran out the door, screaming for help in my bare feet, and I got to the neighbours and bashed their window, screaming for help, saying something's happened to my daddy, I need help. And they told me to go away, but I think they thought it was a Halloween prank, and so I just kept running and screaming.
Minutes later, 2 of the gunmen came back.
They ran to Thomas first, checked Thomas, and I lifted the phone and I could hear what sounded to be the biggest one shouting, "Get back here now and finish the bastard off." 3 times he shouted that, and I was phoning for an ambulance. And then I started screaming, "Please leave him alone. Don't shoot him again." And the smaller one shot him again.
Mark English and his twin brother Thomas Jr., pictured here as toddlers, were beside their father as he lay dying at the bottom of the stairs.
We were terrified, really terrified. We couldn't stop screaming. We sort of stood for a while and in shock. We couldn't move. We were screaming. It was absolutely horrendous, horrifying for a child of that age to watch their own parent die.
Soon after the murder, police contacted Doreen with news of a potential lead. A man had been caught on CCTV buying the sledgehammer which had been used in the attack. But Doreen English was about to get a terrible shock.
They brought me in and asked me if I would look at the photograph to see if I knew the person in it. And it was horrendous. I just couldn't believe my eyes.
The man she was looking at in the footage is her brother, Neil Pollock.
It was one of the worst things I've ever had to do, was to say that's my brother. You know, it was just heart-wrenching.
Doreen helped to raise her young brother, seen here as a page boy at her wedding to Tommy. Neil would join the couple on family holidays. Every day at the trial, Doreen faced her brother in the dock. He was found guilty of possessing an item intended for terrorism and of intent to pervert the course of justice. But Doreen believes he knows a lot more about her husband's death.
What would you say to your brother Neil today? Because he could help put your husband's murderers away.
Well, I would just say, Neil, my daddy brought you up with more morals, and I am just dumbfounded that you haven't had the decency in you to do the right thing. And I know it's a hard thing to do, to tell the truth, when there's so many people out there that's wanting to harm you. But I don't know how you're going to live with yourself if you don't do the right thing and tell what you know.
At the time of the murder, police said that the death was part of a bloody UDA-UVF feud, but Doreen says she believes there may have been deeply personal motives for the particular selection of her husband as a target. Asked by police if she knew of anyone who wanted to do her husband harm, she named 2 men. One was this man, Mark Haddock, who's just been acquitted of the murder.
Haddock and Thomas never seen eye to eye, for the simple reason Thomas was in the UDA, he was in the UVF. They had a lot of run-ins, and It was more like a macho thing between them. Thomas wouldn't back down to him. And they just hated each other.
And the other was this man, John Bond, who was also acquitted, Doreen's brother-in-law, who was married to her sister Christine. Christine Bond had had an affair with Tommy English.
They lived together for about 4 months. She had left John for Thomas, and then Thomas left her, and she finished up back with John.
Apart from her brother, the only two people who have been convicted of involvement in the murder of Tommy English are the Stewart brothers, Robert and Ian, who in August 2009 became assisting offenders. Doreen English says police told her that the brothers had handed themselves in just weeks after coming upon the scene of a motorbike accident in which her son Thomas Jr. was killed, the boy who was beside his father as he lay dying. According to police, the incident had a profound effect on the Stewarts, who later confessed their role in the murder and implicated 14 other loyalists in up to 30 offences.
They said that they'd been having a hard time dealing with their part in Thomas's murder, and that our son died in a wee motorbike accident, and they said that they passed the scene that night that he died and saw him, and after that they went to England for a couple of weeks and then basically couldn't live with themselves. It was like the last straw for them that broke their back, so they handed themselves in.
To Charlize, the only good thing that came out of her brother's death was the impact it appeared to have had on the Stewarts.
You always ask your what ifs and whys, and I went to myself, is this why he's died? To give us justice? That's Thomas's reason. You know, you could have had that. I always went to myself, this is justice for us, he's died for justice. But I also said to myself, it does show the brothers do have remorse.
But there can be little doubt that the Stewarts' decision was also influenced by the fact that they got 15 years off their sentence for murder. In his judgment, Justice Gillen described the Stewart brothers as ruthless criminals and unflinching terrorists whose evidence was infected with lies and whose memories had been ravaged by years of illegal drug-taking and alcohol abuse. Rather than turning over a new leaf, these were, said the judge, obviously the same men wearing new suits. Robert Stewart also admitted to police that he had had sex with a series of underage children. Revelations about the brothers' addictions and their criminal past raise a number of hard questions for the prosecution service and the police, given that the case cost in the region of £15 million. How could the public prosecution service have deemed the brothers to be credible witnesses, given the lack of any compelling supporting evidence? The PPS director, Bara McGrory, recently told the BBC he was satisfied there was a case to answer.
There is a basis for being extremely careful in the weighing up of the evidence in a case, in every case, but particularly a case such as this. But I'm certainly satisfied that there was a very careful consideration of the material in this case.
The police spent 2 years assessing the Stewart brothers, but stressed that the deal was a matter for the PPS. They told Spotlight, the agreement under the Serious Organised Crime and Police Act 2005 is one between an assisting offender and the Public Prosecution Service, not police. It would be inappropriate to comment. While the murder of Tommy English was one of a number of killings investigated by the former police ombudsman Nuala O'Lone as part of Operation Ballast, the report itself had been triggered by the father of a murder victim. Raymond McCord had brought a complaint to her office in 2003. He believed that his son had been murdered by members of a UVF gang and that the police investigation had been hampered because the killers were special branch informers. In the course of the investigation that followed, Nuala O'Lone looked again at up to 15 murders which she suspected had not been properly investigated by police because at least 4 of the chief suspects were special branch agents actively involved in UVF murder operations. Of the 4 police agents mentioned in the Ballast report, Informant 1 is now widely believed to be this man, Mark Haddock. He was one of the 2 men whose names Doreen English says she gave to police on the night of her husband's murder.
Mark Haddock was actually arrested for questioning shortly after Thomas was murdered, and he was actually found to have documents in his car with Thomas's name, address, registration and make of car.
Nuala Olone's report confirms that there was intelligence linking Informant 1, Mark Haddock, and 3 of his associates to the English killing. They were arrested a week later, but provided alibis for each other and were released without charge. I first investigated Mark Haddock in 2006. At that stage, I was unable to name him for legal reasons, but I spoke with the man who first recruited him as a CID informer at the age of 17. Speaking publicly for the first time, retired officer Trevor McElrath told me that alarm bells began ringing after his agent was recruited by Special Branch in 1991. He heard reports that Haddock had been arrested as the driver in a suspected murder, only to be released later without charge.
He couldn't seem to be the only one that got away. The gunman was caught, he was a driver, so he was caught too. He spent, I can't remember whether it was 6 or 9 months on remand, and then one day the charges were withdrawn or dropped by the Director of Public Prosecution.
But from the moment he got into the murder car, he was never going to be prosecuted for that murder bid?
No.
Because he was an informer?
Correct.
In 2006, McElrath was adamant that he had alerted his superiors to the fact that an agent was out of control, but he was repeatedly ignored.
How high up did this go? Senior ranking policeman would have known?
Yes, senior ranking policeman.
In the 1990s, most of the UVF's victims in North Belfast were loyalists, members of their own community. But some of the attacks on local nationalists were purely sectarian, including the one Mark Haddock and his gang are alleged to have carried out on this man, whose case was also re-examined as part of Operation Ballast. In March 1992, John Flynn worked for a Catholic taxi firm near Mount Vernon. One evening he was called to White Abbey Hospital, where a gunman was lying in wait.
Went down to Ward 5, hit the horn, maybe about 2 minutes later, somebody appeared out of the darkness with a grey hooded top, hooded a weapon. It didn't go off, so I ran and he ran after me. I fell and he stood over me, and the weapon didn't work again, you know. I don't know where I got the strength from, but I got off the ground anyway and I grabbed him and the weapon. I knew once I got my hands on it that I had a chance, you know. He wouldn't let go of it, I wouldn't let go of it. 2 of us were fighting with our heads, so I lifted him, clean off the ground, the 2 of us, through the window in the doctor's surgery at White Abbey Hospital.
Was the attacker masked?
No.
What did he look like?
Well, I gave a photo fit in the police station, and he dark hair, short dark hair, skinhead types, moustache, well built, tattoo.
Where was the tattoo?
On his arm, hand.
The description resembles some of the details of Mark Haddock's appearance. Trevor McElrath said he remembers that intelligence sources at the time pointed to Haddock.
Agents after that told us that Haddock had done that.
John Flynn says he believes the attacker's prints were on the gun which was left at the scene, and possibly his blood on his clothes. In 1997, the UVF tried to kill him again by putting a bomb under his car.
Well, 2 days later I got a mask card, posted through the door.
Uh-huh.
And it said on it, 3rd time lucky. a UVF Tigers Bay.
In her report, Nuala O'Lone concluded that the collusion was systemic. She found evidence that police had withheld information about agents suspected of murder and subjected informants to sham interviews before releasing them without charge. She also found that Special Branch had routinely destroyed a mass of forensic and documentary evidence linking agents to crimes. Nuala O'Lone was convinced that this was a deliberate strategy and that junior officers could not have operated as they did without what she called knowledge and support at the highest levels of the RUC PSNI.
It was very, very shocking. It remains shocking to this day. And where we had found clear evidence of collusion, where we had found clear evidence that crimes which had been admitted to, crimes of which police were aware had not been prosecuted, crimes which clearly required proper investigation and hadn't been investigated.
Nuala O'Lone was so shocked by the potential scale of the collusion that she recommended that not only should the killers be investigated properly, but also, at the same time, allegations that handlers and their superiors had been involved in murder. But so far, not a single charge has resulted from the second investigation. So why has one of the investigations fallen so far behind the other? In 2007, the Historical Inquiries team was asked to implement the recommendations of the Ballast Report. The lawyer who acts on behalf of some of the victims says that his impression was that the HET was making good progress.
The Historical Inquiries team were getting their teeth into this case, as I understand it, and were examining all aspects, including the sensitive issue of the investigation of handlers.
In 2009, the investigation into Loyalist killings was transferred from the HET to the police's Serious Crime Branch. The police said this was the most appropriate mechanism to take the work forward, and the investigation of the police handlers and controllers was transferred to the Ombudsman's office. But 3 years later, there appears to have been little movement. We understand that as recently as last month, there were just 2 officers assigned to the investigation of handlers and controllers suspected of involvement in serious crimes, including murder. A situation which we understand the Ombudsman has attributed to a serious lack of resources. Nuala O'Lone says if that's the case, it's just not good enough.
I tell you something, it is possible to do this with maybe a dozen members of staff. It is possible to do it. And certainly of the number of investigators that the Police Ombudsman has, and with the number of investigators, certainly whom I had working on historic cases, we managed to do it.
If you were still the Ombudsman, would the investigation of handlers and their controllers be your priority?
Oh, I would have carried on from where I left off. As the evidence began to come through from the police investigations, I would have been proceeding with my investigations.
We asked the Ombudsman to confirm how many staff had been assigned to this investigation since 2009 and how much funding had been requested for this aspect of its investigation. Has anyone been charged as a result of their inquiries? It said, it's not appropriate to discuss the number and nature of the staff involved in that investigation, nor is it appropriate to discuss its operational resourcing in any detail. However, the office want to assure the families of those linked to the allegations that the first stage of the investigation is proceeding according to plan and has not been hampered in any way through a lack of resourcing. Some of the families of the victims are also deeply troubled by the fact that they had thought that both investigations into the alleged killers and the police handlers were being supervised by a specially established oversight panel consisting of Nuala O'Lone and a leading barrister, Richard Harvey. But in reality, the panel is only looking at the investigation into Loyalists.
One of the concerns that Richard Harvey and I have sitting as the independent monitoring panel for the police ongoing police investigations is that if the police ombudsman isn't doing the handler and controller stuff, if they're not investigating that, but the police are investigating murders, it's not impossible that you might end up with somebody charged in court who turns around in court and says, well, actually, my handler told me I could do this. And then there would be serious problems. So it's very important that the police ombudsman is working as fast as the police are.
Some of those who criticise the speed of the investigation into handlers believe that the failure of the recent Supergrass trial may have been a deliberate attempt to frustrate justice.
People other than special branch handlers and controllers have been used as scapegoats to, if you like, promote in a disproportionate way and downsize the key sensitive investigation that needs to take place, and that is a full-scale criminal investigation against the special branch handlers and controllers. That hasn't happened. Instead, there has been a diversion and a focus of money and resources, millions of pounds, to promote what on one view could be perceived as a showcase Supergrass trial to the exclusion of the other core component of ballast.
It's a view shared by the Committee on the Administration of Justice.
It is a mystery to us sitting on the outside of this as to why no other prosecutions have taken place prior to this in relation to the matters that were uncovered in the ballast report that would have used other types of evidence that would have been perhaps somewhat more effective than the type of evidence that has been presented in the recent trial.
Why do you think?
Is there an effort to prevent either embarrassment or to cover up the misconduct or criminal behaviour of police officers? And if that is the case, that's simply unacceptable in a democratic society. No one is above the law.
There is now growing speculation that it is the forthcoming Gary Haggerty trial that will finally bring the issue of police handlers and their agents to a head. Haggerty turned Supergrass after he was charged with the murder of John Harbinson in 1997. The taxi driver's body was found dumped in an alleyway near Mount Vernon. He had been beaten beyond recognition. Haggerty's co-accused in that case is Mark Haddock. So given the acquittals in the recent Supergrass case, does the UVF have much to fear from the forthcoming Haggerty trial?
Well, they might say, look at the Stewart case, look at how it ended. Will the Haggerty case be any different? Will the result be any different? Have we got anything more to fear? Now, I spoke to a senior loyalist, someone who would know Haggerty very well. And he said, compared to the Stewarts, Haggerty would be a star witness, a memory that is sharp as a razor, someone referred to within the loyalist world as Mr. Gadget, someone who walked about with all sorts of gadgetry and recording equipment. And what the loyalist leadership fears is that he may have recorded some of their meetings. And Gary Haggerty reaches out beyond the UVF. At his level of the organisation, he would have sat at meetings of the Combined Loyalist Military Command, so at meetings that brought in the UVF, the UDA and the Red Hand Commando. So do they fear him more than they fear the Stewarts? They would fear his information, they would fear his credibility, they would fear his status more.
Loyalist spokespersons such as Ken Wilkinson warn of dire consequences if the assisting offenders system is used to prosecute senior UVF figures.
People have to look at what they're bringing down in our community. And I stress quite clearly now that if they continue with these, they're going to destabilise loyalist communities.
When you say destabilise, what do you mean?
Well, the people who are there within loyalism, within the section of loyalism that I deal with, are there and have been for the past 30 years working at that to bring people down a peaceful mode, and they have achieved that. So why take people back? Why take these people out of our society, the old brigade, the stabilisers? Why take them and then leave the young hawks there?
In a way, that's a threat. So should we not go after the UVF because it might destabilise that leadership? Or are we not going after the UVF leadership because the real story is where that UVF leadership takes you to? And it takes you to see people, and it takes you to see places. And those people in those places are not meant to be seen.
One pointer as to how this might happen can be seen in what Ken Wilkinson says is his attitude to the naming of police handlers and their superiors.
We all want to know. My community wants to know too who the handlers are. Because these people are damaging our society. They're damaging my community. I believe it goes right to the very top.
The very top of government?
Yeah. I believe that they have to look at themselves. As I said, sometimes these people might have to look in the mirror instead of continually pointing a finger against us.
Last week, Gary Haggerty lost a judicial review in the High Court to access hundreds of taped interviews he gave police as an assisting offender over 2 years of intensive debriefing. The court heard that on those tapes, Haggerty has made allegations of criminality by him and by others, including police officers. The Haggerty case offers a significant opportunity to advance the investigation of police handlers, according to Nuala O'Lone.
There is currently another assisting offender like the Stewart brothers being interviewed, and the police ombudsman is fully cited of what's happening in that. So any evidence or any material which is being given by that person which relates to police officer misconduct or criminality, the police ombudsman will already have. And I guess if I were the police ombudsman, that would all be being followed up. It seems to me from what is being said in the office that they haven't got to that stage yet.
Last night, the police ombudsman told us that following a referral from the PSNI Chief Constable, the office is investigating allegations of police criminality made by an assisting offender. In the meantime, John Flynn says he will keep fighting until he gets justice. He's taking a judicial review against the police ombudsman and the Chief Constable to explain the lack of movement in the current investigation into alleged collusion.
Would you encourage former special branch handlers and their superiors to cooperate in any future inquiry?
Yeah, I think that people should cooperate as much as possible. I would urge people, in as much as they feel they can themselves, to come forward and to cooperate, because it's in the interest of all of us to make sure that the truth comes out, but not just the truth, but that justice is done. And that's the key point as far as the public are concerned. Victims do get justice.
As to whether or not the role of Loyalist and Republican informants and their handlers throughout the Troubles will ever see the light of day, opinions are divided.
We're meant to live with this notion that this was a place of warring tribes that had within it an honest referee. The honest referee became a player in the war. And that's why we talk about the dirty war and its ugly truths. And I think that's why there will always be barriers in the way of a truth process. And it's why we will never have MI5, the special branch, the FRU, the army, the police in the same room with the IRA and the Loyalists.
Do you think the truth will ever come out?
I think the truth has a way of coming out eventually, yes. I don't think anyone would have ever expected that what we reported in the Ballast report would ever come out. I don't think they would have expected that what we've seen since then would have come out. So I think, yes, eventually it will come.
Of each new Supergrass prosecution.
Good morning, very warm welcome to Rescue Squad 925 to Newcastle.
The new Supergrass laws were brought in because the police and prosecutors believed they were losing the fight against organised crime. Whether that threat is growing is difficult to prove, but every city has its violent criminals. Newcastle upon Tyne is no exception.
We have evidence that the gunman lay in wait to kill Mr. Knight, and we certainly cannot rule out the possibility that it was as a result of a feud.
Gangster Freddie Knights was shot dead on his mother's doorstep. Police suspected he'd been killed by rivals. The chief suspect was John Sayers, a leading member of a well-known Tyneside crime family.
My dad and his brothers and his cousins, they've all been in prison.
My dad got shot. My younger brother Michael, he got shot 6 times and survived. In 1990 I got 15 years for conspiracy to rob. 2007 I got 4 years for tax evasion. And in between that I've had 2-3 years in remand for different offences.
John Sayers and some of his associates were charged with the murder of Freddie Knights.
They said I had organised it.
How?
By planning it.
The murder trial was moved to Leeds amid high security. Armed police brought the defendants to court. Surveillance teams filmed everyone arriving. Despite the huge effort, there was still a serious security breach. A juror was phoned and threatened. Police investigated, but couldn't link it to anyone, so the trial carried on. 3 men were convicted of manslaughter, but not John Sayers.
John Henry Sayers was acquitted of all the charges after the 3-month trial at Leeds Crown Court.
Although John Sayers was now a free man, he believed he would always be a police target.
I knew they would leave us alone for a short while because they had been embarrassed. So I knew they would be coming back. Didn't know when or where, but I knew they'd be back.
7 years later, events at the murder trial came back to haunt him. A Supergrass came forward with dramatic new evidence that John Sayers had been behind the attempt to nobble the juror. This man, Errol Hay, was a Newcastle criminal and paid police informer. Hay claimed that during a visit to the court, he'd been instructed to make the threatening telephone call.
The only day he was there was when everything was explained in open court as to what had happened the night before. And that's where he learned about it. I knew he was an informer from years ago, so I didn't have anything to do with him.
Did he know him?
I knew him, yeah.
And what was he like?
Drug addict, little weasel.
Errol Hay said he'd been told what to do by John Sayers. Hay took police officers to this former mining village near Newcastle. He showed them the phone box he'd made the call from. The police already knew this was the correct phone box. They traced the threatening phone call soon after it had been made. This was the vital corroboration they needed before taking the word of a Supergrass.
If we are unable to corroborate what they have to say, or if we are able as a result of that exercise to contradict what they have to say, then it's extremely unlikely that we will be advancing them as credible witnesses of truth.
Following his success in the Noddy Rice murder case, prosecutor Kingsley Highland now signed a Supergrass contract with Errol Hay, who was given an alias. John Sayers was charged with conspiracy to pervert the course of justice.
What would have been the personal consequences of it going all the way?
Dying in jail.
The entire case relied 101% on Hay telling the truth. This was a one-witness case, and he was either telling the truth or he was not.
But some in the prosecution team already knew that Hay was telling lies. He'd beefed up his story by telling the police he'd made not just one phone call to the juror in Leeds, but 2. Again, he took them to the phone box he said he'd used. But this time when the police checked, there'd been no phone call. They couldn't find any record of anyone calling Leeds that night. And it called Hay's credibility into question. If he couldn't be believed about this call, why should he be believed about making that first threatening call?
The CPS knew, but the defence didn't, that no such call to Leeds that night could have been made from any of 48 boxes that were trawled and investigated within a 3-mile radius. If I had had this material when I was cross-examining Hay over, I think, 2 or 3 days, I would have exploded him as a witness of truth, and yet it was denied to the defence.
The jury nobbling case came to an abrupt end. when the defence obtained the phone records that showed Hay was lying. They only got them late in the day from a police officer. They should have been handed over much earlier by the CPS. The judge was highly critical of the prosecution, saying there'd been a deliberate, conscious decision to flout the rules. He then ordered the trial be stopped. The person who failed to disclose the key evidence revealing the Supergrass had lied was the senior prosecutor, Kingsley Highland. The CPS refused to allow Mr. Highland to answer questions about this himself. Would you categorise this as a gross failure?
The material should have been disclosed, and it wasn't, and it led to the halting of the prosecution. That has been a very painful experience for everybody concerned, and that case, together with one or two other ones, have meant that we're now dealing with disclosure with new systems in place to make sure that this sort of thing never happens again.
Errol Hay died of cancer shortly after giving his evidence. His Supergrass contract to tell the truth turned out not to be worth the paper it was written on.
It's too easy for anybody to go and tell lies without there being any fear of reprisal by the system. Once you accept it as a Supergrass, that's it. You can say whatever you want.
Isn't the point that the new system actually can't change the nature of these defendants, and we are in exactly the same place as we were when this system was discredited?
All I can say to you is that you have to make a decision in each individual case. We reject far more of these proposed agreements than we agree to. It is only when it is clear to us that we can put a witness forward in a way that will most benefit the public interest and convict serious criminals of very serious offences when we might not otherwise be able to.
The new generation Supergrass is too valuable to be ignored. So too was the old generation, until they were thoroughly discredited.
I become a Supergrass because I just didn't like drugs, and I didn't like what drugs was doing to people and doing to people's families.
Rabbit's foot.
That?
Yeah.
That's me dream catcher. Grab your bad dreams and turn them into real dreams. Nice dreams. It's what the Indians have hanging out of the teepees. It was saying, white man talking with false tongue.
How about Paul Grimes?
Me, I talk with fucking straight tongue. That's why I get myself into a lot of trouble. Because I don't care. At one time, there was only certain people that knew me. Now every cunt knows me. People just stand and stare at me. Yeah, have I seen that face before? And then try and work it out in the minds where they've seen you.
Then, when they've worked it out, do they shed grass?
What? Yeah, that's when they say grass. But they don't say it to your face. They either drive past or fucking walk past and say it. They don't stop and say it.
Grimes is despised by the Underworld for bringing down the criminal empire of John Hass.
It's the warehouse that John Hass had. Once he got behind the gates in there, behind the walls, that was his little fortress. That's where he'd run everything from there. This is where his offices used to be. He had one in the back, one in the front. The front office was mine. See, every part of that building is cameraed up to death. If anyone come to see him, you had to stand on the gate with a radio and blow through who come to the gate to see if you had permission to let them in. And if he said no, they're not allowed in, they didn't get into the dock at all. And that's where he'd done all of his business in there, because that's where he thought he was invincible. You hear all that? You hear all that? Grass. Was.
Within minutes of Grimes' return visit, trouble started. A security guard had recognised him.
What's Paul Grimes doing here? I hope he's got 2 fucking police officers with him. Do you know who that cunt is? Lying little fucking shit. Don't fucking bring him near me. That little fucking prick in there. There's this 30 story in that book. He's a lying little bastard.
Men from the pallet yard across the street approached the warehouse, brandishing metal bars. Grimes made a hasty getaway. That evening, the car was smashed up and a lump of concrete thrown through the windscreen.
That fella who's got the pallet yard across the street, I don't know what he's screaming about. John has set his fucking pallet yard on fire and shot a bullet at him so he can put a camera on to keep an eye on his property to get money. You know, and he doesn't even fucking know that, this stupid.
Would you not be tempted to make a lot of money out of drugs like a lot of other gangsters?
No. Not at all. Why? Because I believe is what I keep going. I'm not into killing people.
Do you have to be that brutal in order to?
All it breaks down to you've got no feelings on what you're doing to people. Plus, you mustn't have feelings about your own kids and your own families to do things like that. And all they're interested in is making money, making big profits.
Grimes's war against drugs would take him head-to-head against some of Liverpool's biggest ever criminals. Paul Grimes turned Supergrass and declared war on Liverpool's drug dealers when his eldest son Jason became involved in hard drugs. Jason had managed to escape Liverpool and a life of crime by joining the Royal Navy. But the drugs still found him.
He was a young lad who used to like having a laugh. Playing football, he was in the boxing team and all that. He got the most promising boxer when he had a competition. He lost the competition, but he got the most promising boxer. Like even at school, he was good at school, he was good at athletics, he was good at everything. But he got involved with the wrong girl and ended up fucking his life up. And why he overdosed is he found out that the girl he was with gone lesbian. I got a phone call saying that he was dead. On his 21st birthday. And that, it was just gobsmacked over it. Who were blamed for him to be in here is drug dealers. Because if it wasn't for the likes of them people, he wouldn't have been into drugs. He wouldn't have been able to get hold of them, and he wouldn't have put his life through what he put it through, injecting himself with drugs. In my time, robberies and robbers would supply the family and all that with clothes, food on the table, good living and what have you. But when drugs come on the scene, I wanted out of it all because I didn't like what the drugs was doing to people's lives. This with John As was a start, really it was a joke. He used to come in trousers, dressed up shirt, and we used to just laugh at him. He used to put gloves on and oil on his hands and everything. He didn't like getting...
Moisturiser or something, Nivea cream or something.
He was using hand stuff, what you put on your hands.
What kind of gangster is he?
Well, this is what he was like. He was a vain bastard. He just used it as to let people think that he was working straight. And money that he was spending, because he did spend money like it was nobody's business, that he was working hard for his money, but he was still out doing his devilment overnight.
What kind of devilment?
Breaking into warehouses, doing armed robberies and things like that. What he was good at.
Hassan Grimes unleashed a reign of terror on Liverpool.
Went into Tony Murray's yard, smashed all the cars up, standing there with his shotgun. Same again, John As was dressed to kill. Everyone else was in boiler suits, and John As stood out like a sore thumb. He just looked as though he'd just come out of Lewis's window with a balaclava on.
He was a kind of dapper Don, wasn't he? Who does he model himself on?
I don't know, I've got a clue. I've got a clue, but that's the way he was there. Everyone else was in boiler suits, balaclavaed up, smashing thing. He was standing there with the shotgun, and the next thing is he heard bang, and Tony Murray was shot.
Haas was from the new generation of gangster and realised that the fastest way to the top was through drugs. he went straight to the source, the young Turk who dominated the British market, Süleyman Irgun. He had direct connections to the Turkish mafia, and they controlled the Afghan heroin route into Britain. When we found him, he had just been released from 14 years in prison for heroin dealing.
It was going on the street of about £24,000 the key. We started selling it about 2021. A lot of people was not happy, but business is business.
Well, that must have attracted immediate attention because there are people on the fringes must have been saying these boys are moving big amounts.
Well, no one would mess with us.
Yeah.
No, there wasn't a person in the country that would object to it.
Why? Too big?
It was too powerful.
Too dangerous, too powerful. Yeah. And what are the consequences of going up against you guys? Death.
Haas was buying pure heroin from the Turks, and to maximise his profits, he batched the heroin, diluting it with paracetamol.
Dealers are just selling. They just want to make dough. They don't care whether it's good or whether it's bad, as long as it's selling. If it's selling, boom, they'll buy it. And if they can get it cheap and it sells, they'll do that.
You wanted you could have had?
I had unlimited access to cash. Because I was only young, 21, 22 years old. I was driving around in a 325i convertible. No one had it then. Do you know what I mean? I came home with £250,000, emptied it on the living room floor, looked at it and just thought nothing. I didn't even want to count it. I was so bored with seeing cash. I didn't even want to see it.
So what did you do with your money?
With my money?
Yeah.
Threw it about.
Yeah.
Give it to people. Lent it to people.
Yeah.
Never chased it back up.
Yeah.
Just wasn't valuable.
Yeah.
That was my first baby, wasn't it? And as his father used to say, Mummy's boy.
And it happened on his
21st birthday. He was lovely, he was intelligent, had his pick of girls. He actually passed his 11 plus. And then when he came out the Navy, we was devastated, you know. And then his life just went like sort of downhill from then. But when he died, he was a picture of health. He'd never touched drugs for 7.5 months. And he did it without medication or nothing.
So he tried to wean himself off?
He did it himself. He did it all himself.
Cold turkey?
He did it all himself.
And then one relapse?
And 10 days later, that was it.
Jason's death tore the family apart. Paul promised to get even with the heroin dealers. The opportunity came from an unexpected source. Semi-literate, Paul relied on his wife Christine to run their scrapyard, but the business was in trouble. He was soon called in for a meeting with Customs and Excise.
Like I had 2 meetings with the customs over one of my businesses because he owed VAT and all that. After they had the meeting, I asked them, without me accountant being there, if I heard anything about drug deals, was they interested? And he said, yeah. And he'd give me his phone number, put his name on it. He'd hear anything, give us a ring.
It was like, you tell us what you know and different things, and, you know, we'll squash that VAT bill.
And how much was the VAT bill for?
I think it was about £126,000.
Grimes got the opportunity soon afterwards. he was offered 32 tons of scrap lead by his brother, Snowball.
They wanted to sell the ingots. And because I had a scrap metal business, I got involved in it then.
His brother, Snowball, told Paul that the ingots had been used to conceal a massive shipment of cocaine, £70 million worth, masterminded by Curtis Cocky Warren.
The people that he was involved with his first shipment and come in, was told to bury the ingots and leave them buried and forget all about them. But because of greed, they didn't.
No family left. None of his family spoke to him. None of his family spoke to him for a long time. It took his mum a long time to speak to him again, you know. His dad used to say, "Have you seen Tom Jones?" And he'd say, "You know, who's Tom Jones?" And he'd go, "You know, the green, green grass of home."
Customs were following them and had their every move under surveillance.
I saw a man on the wheel sitting down in the corner, drinking orange juice. A handbag attracted my attention. Just a handbag. It's not him. I looked at it and I thought, she's old Bill. Do you know what I mean? And I mentioned that. No one really batted an eyelid. And I said, I ain't comfortable. So I just got up and walked out.
In July 1993, Customs moved in on the gang. They found 55 kilograms of heroin and £840,000 in cash. The Turks were sentenced to 14 years and Haas received 18. But in a scam that would embarrass the country's political elite, John Haas would famously bluff his way out of prison and become Grimes's next target. The mid-1990s saw Michael Howard as Home Secretary. The Conservatives knew where they stood when it came to crime.
It's time to birch violent young thugs.
If someone has 17 previous offences, it must be a minor clue that while they're out on bail, they might do it again. We are the party of law and order. Michael, stand and deliver.
But behind the scenes, Michael Howard's department was in secret negotiations with one of the most dangerous criminals in the country, John Haas. Haas had been caught with £18 million worth of heroin and was looking to get his sentence reduced. He called upon Britain's leading criminal families for help. One of them was Paul Ferris, Glasgow's most notorious crime godfather. He had been a hitman and drug dealer and was known for kneecappings and gun running.
What I do know is John Haas, who was on remand at that time in Liverpool, and they were putting together a £50,000 package for a procurement of arms to get him bail or a reduced sentence.
Dominic Noonan and his family rule gangland Manchester. With convictions for armed robbery and prison escape, he was an ideal person to help in Haas's scam.
It's a well-known fact that criminals who are in situations and they've got money behind them will buy guns and plant them and say, "I'll tell you where guns are."
They were getting firearms, put them in a designated area, phoning the cops up, they come and get the firearms. Firearms are off the streets, they make an application for bail based on the material that they've got, or they put it towards presentation to the judge for a reduced sentence.
From inside his prison cell, Haas gave accurate locations for over 18 consignments of weapons, over 85 shotguns, 24 machine guns, 14 automatic weapons, 2,000 rounds of ammunition, and Semtex. But the information he supplied brought no arrests.
He kidded everyone to war. Guns he had planted, Semtex he had planted, he had everything fucking planted to get him off with the 18 years.
I suppose anyone who's getting that kind of stuff handed over will get whatever they want off the government. Semtex, isn't it? Don't want that in the wrong hands, do we?
Semtex. He had someone planting that in cars and fucking things like that. You don't get that done for nothing.
I'll say he spent about 200 grand off record. Fair play to him. I mean, if you've got that kind of money, you can pay them off and get things done, do it.
Haas had done a deal with the Turks. They lent him the money to buy the weapons, and he promised that they too would be included in any deal.
Turkish people are different. Turkish close loyalty is worth more than money to us. Hass's gang was involved with greed and deception. That's all they were after.
Double-crossed, the Turks were left to serve their 14-year sentence, while Hass was granted a royal pardon, authorised by Michael Howard. Following our investigation, the circumstances surrounding Michael Howard's decision to release John Hass are now the subject of a top-level Home Office inquiry. Back on the streets and back in business, Hass set up Big Brother security. He based himself in a huge warehouse complex on Liverpool docks. With a new Turkish connection, he restarted heroin dealing. Hass sought out his old gang to help run the security business, and on the list was one Paul Grimes.
John has turned up and asked me who we work for, on security, blah, 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 and all that carry on. And he said, if you want a job, give us a ring. Half an hour later, got on the phone to my handler, phoned him up, told him what went on, and said, do you want me to go for it? And he said, go for it.
This is your handler at Customs and Excise.
Blessing and a code name of Oscar Wilde, Grimes took up Hass's offer of a security job with Big Brother.
I only started off as a guard for him, minding a site, and I built myself up to a supervisor. Then he ended up running his business for him while he got on with doing what he was doing. Again, just trust. See, the reason why I got so close to Az is because I knew him years ago, and he knew that I was a stand-up fella then. You know, and that's how I got close to him.
Over the next 2 years, Grimes embedded himself deep in the heart of Hass's new empire. Grimes had access to all areas of the vast warehouses Hass controlled. He even supplied hydrofluoric acid for an acid bath in the cellars. Further down was a shooting range where criminals were invited to test guns they were thinking of buying. Hass was working with renewed confidence. After his royal pardon, he felt invincible. But behind the scenes, Grimes was secretly reporting his every move to customs.
I used to have to meet them. I'd have to say, I'll meet you at, say, 10:30 at such and such cafe. I've got half an hour with you, or 10 minutes with you, and then I've got to be on the road there. But I still had to have my phone on in case Az wanted to phone me to see where it was. The risk was quite big. I'm putting my life on the line. That's why I joined the gym and all that, because the stress that I was going under, I had to go to the gym and fucking work it off. Otherwise it had just exploded altogether. It is nerve-wracking.
Customs, with Grimes's help, arranged for a bug to be placed in Hass's private office. Grimes was putting his life on the line, but it supplied Customs with high-quality evidence.
It's all nerve-wracking. what you've got to go through and all that carry on. It's just all nerve-wracking. You know, because you like splitting yourself in half, and you're playing a bad guy and you're playing a good guy. So you're getting yourself confused.
To improve the information he was getting, Grimes recruited his second son, Heath, to work for the rapidly expanding Big Brother.
That's Kirkland's over there. It's where he had all the windows smashed so we could get the security on there, get the door. And every window in there he had smashed, now they're all plastic.
Without telling customs, Grimes drove Heath around, teaching him the art of extortion.
There's the place there. That one there, the one in town, the one out in Bootle. You know, I don't know how many cars he set 6 cars on fire in one night. Heath was warned, I don't know how many times, to get away from us. Heath wasn't bothered, as long as he was getting the fucking money off him. And Heath was getting good money off him. He wasn't getting 100 quid here and 100 quid there, he was getting grands off him. Like you're talking to go and set a car on fire or 2 grand he was getting for doing that. That's a lot of fucking money. To just go and throw petrol in a car and set it on fire. That's a lot of money, 5 minutes work for 2 grand. Set a club on fire, you're talking, I think he was getting 5-6 grand.
When Grimes found out that Heath was getting involved in Hass's drug deals, he tried to warn him off.
See, Heath was doing a lot of things for us, but not telling me about them. Like, I didn't know he took gear up to Scotland and was on his way back with 24 grand. I took off on him and I said, what was you doing going to Scotland with fucking drugs and coming back with money? You was only supposed to be doing what he was doing, not just fucking running drugs around.
But going Supergrass and shopping your own son.
Yeah.
A lot of people would draw the line at family, wouldn't they?
Yeah, but see, you say blood is thicker than water, which it is, but the thing is, when you give your son that many opportunities to get away from the person that you knew that he was giving information on, and he wouldn't take the advice that he was giving him, what can you do?
Grimes resigned himself to betraying his son. Heath had become too close to Customs' primary target, John Hass.
What was the most convincing evidence that you managed to generate against him?
It was the guns. When he done the deal over the guns, like the Customs had everything that he was up to, but the guns was the main part.
With information supplied by Grimes, Customs knew when each deal was happening and chose their moment to act.
I was out on the site. John Hass phoned me up to come down to the dock. And when I got down the dock, he said, Eve's on his way down, open the gate, let him in. And that was it. So Eve come in his car, let him in. He went over, spoke to us. A bag was handed to Eve, which was full of guns. I opened the gate, Eve went out, and that was it. And that was the deal that they got them on.
Heath Grimes, John Hass, and 3 others were arrested in coordinated raids around Liverpool. The news came as a shock to Christine Grimes, Heath's mother.
I was told about the arrest on the phone. My son's partner rang me and told me that he'd been arrested, and she filled me in on all the details. I said, I bet you my life, I said, that is Paul Grimes. And it was. And it was. I could read him like a book. When I spoke to his father, after he was arrested, I turned around and I said, why didn't you, that is your son, why didn't you get him out? You've already lost one. Why put another one, through sheer hell? You gave him the job, so therefore, you could have took the job off him.
And then?
He told me to F off and mind my own business. Thank you, bye. He really turned the key on that cell door. He turned the key on that door. And there's a lot of things I've forgave him for. That's one thing. One thing I could never ever forgive him for. Nothing. Nothing. And that was it, and that's the last time I've ever spoke to him. Last time I've ever spoke to him.
Grimes testified against Haas and his own son. This time there would be no royal pardons. As a result, Haas was sentenced to 13 years and Heath Grimes to 5 years. But by giving evidence, Paul Grimes had blown his cover, and with a £100,000 price on his head, would have to spend the rest of his life in hiding.
How safe is it to be Paul Grimes right now?
Not safe.
I'm in my old people's home, aren't I? That's where I live. An old people's home. That's where I live. All old people live here. I'm the youngest one that lives here. I'm happy. Got my telly, got my DVDs, got my stereo system. Got a pub round the corner, a pub round that corner, and a pub down the road. That's it, isn't it? I can walk around and hold my head up and be proud. I don't walk around with my head slumped down and fucking hiding and all that. I walk around with my head held high because I'm not running away from anyone. I'm not running away from.
Do you think you'd be more danger if you ran away than if you stayed where you are?
There's another scenario to that. It's like when they offered. Years ago when I was married and I was carrying on with women, I used to take women to Southport, Warrington and all that. And I could guarantee you some cunts up there that fucking bump into that knew me. And you're taking women out as the way so you don't get caught. And there's a nap, someone bumps into you that you're fucking, who's this you with? Where's your wife? There's always someone who catches you.
Despite the laughter, Grimes lives a nervous existence.
There's the helicopter again.
A week ago, Grimes's father died after a long illness. The news had hit the streets. Grimes feared the Underworld would take the opportunity to stage an ambush. When it came to Haas, not even funerals were off limits.
It's supposed to be, aren't they? Hey, but when you got a fucking lunatic like John has, you know what I mean? He tried to get someone to throw grenades at the funeral, so what you want to try and he was only fighting. Whereas I put him in jail, which is an entirely different matter, isn't it? Right.
Grimes was desperate to pay his respects, but struggled with the huge risks involved in attending the funeral.
I've very rare come over to Liverpool, only unless I've got to. It's a shithole.
Will they not eventually catch up with you? And it's.
Well, that's the chance I've got to take, innit? Az will probably do it when he gets out. He'll probably want to try and do it when he gets out himself. If he wants to try and do it, he can try it. But whether he succeeds or not, that's an entirely different matter.
Too scared to be in the same street as his father's funeral, Grimes drives off. He is forced now to confront the reality of the life he had chosen.
There is an old saying in me that your life is already being planned and mapped out for you when you're born. So maybe it's not me, it's my life. Maybe I was a bastard or done something wrong in my previous life, I don't know. And this is my punishment for that.
After 12 years living in the shadow of death and the pressures of being amongst the people he betrayed, Grimes is now trying to leave his native city. He has asked his handlers to provide a new safe house well away from Liverpool. Grimes is looking at locations all over Britain. Having abandoned gangland and been disowned by his family, he now faces a future in isolation. The price he has to pay for his own survival.